Good. Hi, so I'm James Skidmore, and I want to thank you for coming out tonight to listen to us. Thanks, Aaron, for organizing everything. That's great. As you heard, I'm a prof in the Germanic and Slavic Studies department here at the University of Waterloo. And so what I want to talk to you about in the next 10 minutes or so is is Remembrance Day, if you will, in Germany, and how it's so much different that it's practically not a Remembrance Day, but we'll get into that. The question for today's, let's find that. Is Remembrance Day still relevant? I want you to think about Remembrance Day in our current context here in Canada. And now, because most of you are historians, a lot of German students here, which is great to see, thanks for coming, but most of you are historians, so you can think back into the past more easily than the rest of us. Think of Remembrance Day, or Armistice Day, as we heard it was called, in its first years. One of the key elements of that day is that it's as much as Canada or the Commonwealth or other countries were celebrating or commemorating, a day of mourning for their war dead, they were also commemorating a victory in war. They defeated Germany and the Axis powers. Now imagine, if you will, you're a German. How do you then commemorate a war in which not only did you lose the war, your government collapsed, your economy would collapse within a few short years, your sense of worth as a nation, as a great nation with other great nations, you know, the equal of America, the equal of Britain, the equal of France, was severely tested by the peace accords that settled that war. How are you going to do a remembrance for the soldiers in that war? How are you going to deal with that? How are you going to, as a nation, respond to perhaps a natural inclination to want to mourn your war dead? It's very difficult, right? If you think about it, I mean, how would you do that? It's very difficult. So I'm just going to explain in the next few minutes how Germany has dealt with that over the past 80, 100 years. And a brief history lesson in German history. Of course, I think most of you know this, but just to be very clear, two wars were started in the 20th century, both more or less started by Germany. And so we have the First World War, ends in 1918. Then we have a period in German history called the Weimar Republic, first democracy in Germany. The Weimar Republic actually only ends, technically speaking, in 1945, but for all intents and purposes, it actually ends in 1933 with the rise to power of the Nazis. Then we have a second period in German history called the Third Reich, a 12-year period, but you know, they wanted it to be a 1,000-year Reich, and it certainly had an impact of a 1,000-year Reich in terms of its impact on world history in the 20th century, at least. And then we have a third period, if you will, or third and fourth periods. We have then the Cold War period, or the post-Second World War period, where we have two German nations, the East Germany, the German Democratic Republic, under the Stalinist Soviet sphere of influence, and then we have West Germany, the Federal Republic of Germany. These two countries then reunite in 1989. So just be clear on those stages, because each of those stages will then have an impact on how Remembrance Day, if you will, is commemorated. This morning I had the pleasure of listening to Jeff on the radio, and he made the very insightful comment, and I was kidding him later that I was impressed that an historian could make an insightful comment, but it was a good one. And he said, you know, Remembrance Day in Canada has this. The study of the Remembrance Day in Canada gives us the opportunity to understand social changes in Canadian history. And we've seen a bit of that in both of the presentations just now from Nathan and from Dave. And in Germany, I think this is the case as well. So with the end of the First World War and the return of, and let's be clear, the First World War was a devastating war. Canada lost about 1% of its population, I think. Is it 1%? No, not 1%. 1% of its had about 65,000 war dead, I think. Germany had about 2 million war dead, right? Soldiers, not civilians, soldiers dead. Devastating to the country. Many more injured, of course, and all of that. The problem, of course, was that it also saw the end of the Kaiserreich. It saw the end of German nationalism in the way it had been kind of propagated through the German Empire and through the idea of the glorious German Empire. That all collapsed. And so Germany had serious political difficulties in the 1920s. There were people, members of the veterans associations, etc., who wanted to create a Volkstrauertag, a People's Day of Mourning, or perhaps better parlance would be National Day of Mourning, to honor and remember the war dead. But it was never passed as an official act of the German Parliament. A couple of reasons for that. The German Parliament kept having to have new elections because they could never, the democracy was so unstable, so they could never get these laws passed. The Constitution was unclear whether the national government or the state governments could order whether there'd be or proclaim days, national holidays, etc. But eventually they came to the conclusion, or there was a general movement where a Volkstrauertag would be held. It would be held on either the second or third Sunday of Lent every year, which just shows us how influential the churches were at the time in terms of most national holidays actually in Germany, just as an aside, are church holidays. And so the churches have a great role in deciding these things. But these commemorations could never take place without there being a lot of controversy around them. Either there would be great complaints that these days were being used by far-right extremist groups to try to reignite German nationalism, the kind of nationalism that had caused the First World War. Or groups on the right would proclaim that these days of mourning, these commemorations, were not being sufficiently and honored in society, and so what was the point? And so every time they tried to do these, there would be a lot of controversy surrounding them. So this whole notion of a Remembrance Day, this day of national mourning, never really could take hold in the 1920s. It did eventually establish itself towards the end of the 1920s, but it was never without problems. It was never unproblematic. Then came the rise of Hitler, and the rise of the National Socialists came to power. The National Socialists would have nothing to do with something called a National Day of Mourning. It was too defeatist. It was too much an admission of weakness, an admission of Germany's defeatism, which the Nazis felt that they were called to rectify. So they kept the commemoration, but they changed the name to Heldengedankentag. I forget the exact wording, but basically a day of commemoration of heroes. So they flipped it right around. They flipped it around from being a commemoration of war dead into a commemoration of the heroism of war. We were talking about that earlier. Nathan was mentioning that especially. And that then became an important official state act. There are photos, of course, of Hitler and the leaders of each of the armed services reviewing an honor guard in Berlin and things like that. It was clearly an important act in German political culture. The Nazis were defeated, yay, and then came a divided Germany in the 1940s and 50s. East Germany, we'll just mention that briefly. I'm more interested in West Germany. East Germany had then created a day called, I forget the exact wording, but it was basically a day to recognize the victims of fascism and to fight fascism and imperialism. So clearly a kind of a Stalinist, it was just a politically manipulated sort of thing. It wasn't really about honoring or remembering the fallen soldiers. It was about, it was a part of the Cold War propaganda thing. Skipping quickly over to West Germany, there the Volkstrauertag was reinstituted, and at first it was as West Germany was starting to get on its feet, if you will, it was kind of an official celebration. Celebration is not the right word again. Sorry, commemoration that would take place. For example, on the national level, it would be in the Parliament in Bonn, and so at the Parliament in Bonn, the President would speak, and the Chancellor and others would speak. But it was never called just a Remembrance Day for those who had fallen, as we might say here in Canada. It was always, right from the beginning then of the Federal Republic of Germany, it was a day to commemorate or to honor those who had died in 2 wars, both at home and on the front lines, and to commemorate anyone who has died at the hands of a totalitarian regime. So it was always about the veterans, the fallen soldiers, and the victims of these horrible wars of the 20th century. And that dual nature, that duality of it, which we really don't have here in Canada, I don't think, but I guess maybe we can discuss that. That's really sort of kind of a significant marker, if you will, of that celebration, of that commemoration in West Germany. But what's also interesting, and that's then developed to such a point that now the event, the official act of Volkstrauertag, the official commemoration in Germany, the official national commemoration, will take place this coming Sunday. They've switched it now to the second Sunday before the first Sunday of Advent, so always around the middle of November. And then, again, following the church here. In Lent, of course, Lent is all about death and awaiting, basically Lent is preparation for the death and then the resurrection of Jesus. The church calendar in November, sort of before the Christmas season starts, is also about death and emptiness, and then new life comes with the birth of Jesus. So again, following that church calendar. The official event that will be taking place this coming Sunday will see the president of the country, the vice president of the Bundestag, the president of the Bundesrat, the minister of defense, etc. They will commemorate Volkstrauertag at the Neue Wache in Berlin, on Unter den Linden, major street in Berlin. Maybe many of you have been there. The Neue Wache, which was originally just a guardhouse. It was a Prussian creation, but after the First World War, they attempted to use it as a local memorial for the war dead. It's a bit unclear whether they actually did find the remains of an unknown soldier and buried that person there or not. That's not clear to me whether that's the case or not. But after the Second World War, it was the memorial that was used by the East Germans. But then after 1989, the Neue Wache, this building, became used as a memorial to all victims of war. So that's that second part of that duality that surrounds Volkstrauertag. So it's a beautiful, it's a very simple open room, much larger than this, maybe twice as large as this room. And in the middle of the room is a statue, bronze by Käthe Kollwitz, a famous German sculptor, artist who died just at the end of the Second World War. And it's a mother holding her dead son. It's a Pieta, but not of Mary holding Jesus, but just a mother holding her son. a dead son. And that's where this official commemoration will take place, which is instructive in many ways, because there will be other events taking place at cemeteries where there are war dead and what have you, but that the president and that the official, the official news release from the federal government in Germany is that this is where the Volkstrauertag will be commemorated. And that, I think that's very instructive as to how Germany over the past few decades has become, in my mind, a model of how a country can deal with its past. This is a country that acknowledges its responsibility for 2 world wars, for the attempted destruction of a couple of peoples, most notably the Jews, and yet attempts to out of all of that horror of the 20th century, this is a country that's attempting to then use public rituals and public events, of mourning events such as this, to acknowledge that responsibility and to acknowledge its new responsibility to acknowledge that responsibility, if you get my drift there. And that to me is very instructive. And when I think, was Remembrance Day still relevant? When I look at that teaches me a lot. What it teaches me, I'm not someone who wants to say, well, Germany's better than Canada because, the cheese is better and, you can get, bigger schnitzel and all of that kind of stuff. I don't like comparing countries like that. But one thing that I've learned from this, and which I find missing here, is the focus on the victim. And I don't see the focus on the victim in our Remembrance Day commemorations. That doesn't mean that I would want to throw out the rest of what we do in Remembrance Day when we commemorate those who die, etc. But I do, like Nathan, I do have problems with the first line of the 3rd stanza of In Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. What the German Volkstrauertag is trying to teach us is don't take up the quarrel with the foe. Figure it out. Do something else. Don't have that quarrel when it can lead to what it can lead to, what it can possibly lead to. That for me is extremely instructive. It helps me understand the issues in a way that I don't think I had understood before. Now, the unfortunate thing, if you will, and this is something where so let's be even-handed, where Canada might be instructive to Germany, where we can say, well, that's great. We have a lot of German students here. Most of them didn't know probably that Volkstrauertag was the second Sunday, 2 Sundays before the first Sunday in Advent. It's not part of the national consciousness this day. There are other days in the German sort of commemoration calendar that are a little more present because they probably, if for no other reason, they get more media attention. The most important one being probably the 27th of January, which is the day that Auschwitz was liberated by Russian soldiers. And that day gets more media attention. The speeches that are held in Parliament there get airplay on the evening news, get mentioned in the newspaper, etc. But the Volkstrauertag is really under the radar, which is surprising, perhaps. Perhaps it's connected to the entire intricate issues that Germany has had to deal with in the past 80 to 100 years. I'll leave it there. Thanks for your attention.